Welcome, everybody. I'm Christine Perakis, and we are here on the Career Invincibility Show. I am so excited about this guest who's just been so elusive, and I finally got him, so you get to have him too. I want to introduce you to Scott Miller, a 24-year associate with Franklin Covey. He's an EVP of Thought Leadership, but that really doesn't speak to anything. He hosts the world's largest and fastest-growing podcast newsletter devoted to leadership development. On Leadership. Scott's been a multi-week Amazon #1 best-selling book, Management Mess to Leadership Success, 30 Challenges to Become the Leader You Would Follow, and a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, the 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. Scott authors a weekly leadership column for Inc. and is a frequent contributor on podcasts and webinars, and previously worked for the Disney Company and grew up in Central Florida. I'm super excited to welcome Scott to our show and to hear more about your journey. Welcome, Scott.
Christine, what an honor. Thank you for the platform today.
This is my favorite topic is leadership. And what I love about it is it doesn't necessarily just apply to people in business, right? We all have leadership roles to play in the world. And I can't wait to hear your take on things. And, one of the things that I love to talk about on this show for everybody, it's generally not a straight line from I had an idea and it worked out really well and I became successful, the end, right? So talking about some of the zigs and zags that got you to where you are as a multi-best-selling author and a leadership, leader on leadership. So please, will you share a bit about your story and how you got here?
Well, thanks. It's all zigs and it's all zags. So I think Beyonce might have had the shortest line. Other than that, I don't know. And my guess is she had some zigs along the way. Yes, I am the product, Christine, of really people believing in me more than perhaps I believed in myself. I started, as you said, at the Disney Company. I'm actually from Orlando originally. Worked for the Disney Development Company, which was the real estate arm of the Walt Disney Company for 4 years. They invited me to leave, which is kind of how Disney does it when they kick you out. So Disney fired me because I wasn't right for the culture. And I laugh now because it was part of the best day of my life. And, here is this young single boy from Orlando moving out to Provo, Utah. Now, picture that, right? Single Catholic guy from Orlando moving to Provo, Utah to join the Franklin Covey Company. The only Catholics in the state were the priest and me. That was a zig. A big zig. So I joined the Franklin Covey Company, spent about 5 years in sales, about 10 years in sales leadership, became the company's first and only chief marketing officer for 8 years, and then I went on to write these books that became bestsellers, like kind of sharing my own messy leadership journey. I think what has made me build some influence is that I'm just really raw and relatable and real about the struggles that I've had, all the zigs and the zags, to quote you. I think too often these leadership experts and thought leaders are pretty sterile. They only share the good stories, and I'm here to say leadership is tough. To quote you, it's not a straight line, but I've learned a lot along the way, learned some valuable leadership principles. Who should be a leader, and quite frankly, who shouldn't?
Well, so tell us about that. That's a new one to me, as that people who shouldn't be leaders. How do you know who you are in that spectrum?
Well, so let's start with this, that not everyone should be a leader of people, and I'm quite emphatic about that. You hear a lot of company pablum around, well, everyone's a leader. That's not true. I mean, everyone isn't a leader of people. Everyone shouldn't be a leader of people. People can lead culture, they can lead themselves, they can lead projects, but not everyone should be a leader of people. Just like not everyone should be an anesthesiologist, God forbid. Not everyone should be a commercial airline pilot. Not everyone should lead people. In fact, Christine, I'm not sure I should have led people. It takes a certain type of person. This leadership skills to lead people usually requires you to be extremely abundant, very humble, very invested in other people's success. You usually have a level of healthy dose of humility. I mean, none of these words describe me at all. I've had to learn the value of them. But I think what makes a great leader of people are the listening qualities, that they want to listen more than they want to speak. that they want to invest in other people as much as they're investing in themselves, that leaders realize that their job is actually to get work done with and through other people. And that's pretty heavy. Think about that. A leader's mindset needs to be that your job is to get work done with and through other people. Your job is not to rush in and save the day. Your job is not to be the genius in the room or the smartest person in the room. Your job is to build capacity and capability in other people. And when that becomes your paradigm, you do everything differently. You step back. You step down a little bit. You step aside. You slow down. You are more thoughtful around training and educating and coaching and mentoring. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room or get all the credit for everything. It takes a really unique kind of person to lead people. And there's no shame in not leading people. I think too often, Christine, organizations promote the best top-producing individual producer, right? The most efficient dental hygienist or the most creative digital designer, the top-producing salesperson, because they were the best at their job. Now they're promoted to lead the team, and they have none of the skills that I just described. And they implode and realize they don't want to be a leader. And now companies have lost both their top-producing salesperson and they've lost their leadership pipeline.
Isn't that amazing? I'm thinking as you're talking about how, my last entrepreneurial enterprise, personally, we went from 0 to 160 employees in a few months. And it was a very successful business. Yeah, exactly. I am outstanding at getting a business off the ground and getting it moving and, creating results that are beyond even the founder's expectations. And, what I was not expert at was leading people. And so, I had to learn the hard way how to work with a team, how to be a good leader. And I wish I'd known then what you're talking about now. And instead, I had to do it the long, hard route.
Well, your example is, I think, an instructive one. I do think too often founders, entrepreneurs, owners believe they have to be in every position. It's just not true. Perhaps as a founder, you should be the chief revenue officer. You can still be the CEO and not lead people. You should be really thoughtful about where are your strengths. And I've got certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and I think there's value in shoring up your weaknesses with complementary people around you. And I think it's this misnomer that if you're the owner of the business, that you need to be the leader of people and the leader of culture. You might be the chief fundraiser, the chief strategist, or chief visionary. I think the best leaders are those people that are vulnerable and transparent, that they make a model of recognizing what they're good at and what they're not, and they don't make excuses for it or try to cover for it, but they're actually models of transparency. Because when as a leader, if you're willing to talk about what are your challenges, you make it safe for everybody else to do the same. Everyone now becomes more self-aware. And who doesn't want an organization full of self-aware people that are humble enough and confident enough to surround themselves with people who complement their skill sets?
Well, that just sounds like a dream come true, right? And would I have known then? But, if we're speaking to the people who are entrepreneurs, and I'm trying to get my head around, I called myself the COO. I happen to be the COO and general counsel for my company, as well as the CFO for a time, because we couldn't afford to hire someone like that. And the chief toilet paper roll changer, so you do everything in the beginning and in the early stages of a business when you can't afford to hire the people you ultimately will need for the growth that you are targeting. So, how does a young company or a startup or an early stage company that doesn't have the revenues, let's say, deal with finding the right people and being able to lead as you're growing a team if it's not you, the founders?
Well, I would think of a couple of things. One is, as a founder, I think, again, this idea of being transparent. You sit your team down and say, hey, listen, these are my skills and my strengths. I do this well, I do that well, and I do this less well, and I'm uncomfortable with this. So I'm going to ask that you be patient with me. I'm going to say things I'm going to retract. I'm going to have to offer apologies. I'm going to have to change strategy on occasion. I'm going to have to actually retract things or ask you all to rise to the occasion. I think when you have a culture where the leader really admits openly their strengths and their weaknesses, generally people will rise to the challenge. Sometimes people will take advantage of it. Sometimes opportunists will use it against you. That's just the way the world works. But most people will find that to be a refreshing sense of transparency where the leader says, hey, I really need you all to rise to the occasion on this because this isn't my strength. And then there are times when the leader is going to need to move outside of their comfort zone. They're going to have to role play, build the skills, have courageous conversations, discuss the undiscussables, and, build areas where they typically might not have a strong foundation in to draw upon. I mean, you just have to bootstrap it and then be really thoughtful around the kind of culture you want to build and hire probably less for technical competence and more for character and for trustworthiness. You can teach most skills to most people unless they're highly technically nuanced. I mean, most people hire for technical talent and fire on character. And you probably ought to reverse that. Hire on character and then train people up on their technical needs.
Yeah, no, it is so beautiful to hear that. And it's interesting because, would that I could have, because I keep thinking to myself, sorry, everybody, but, the characteristics you describe of what it would take for someone like me who didn't have the leadership skills when I was setting out to build a business, and that level of humility and vulnerability seems to me to be very strong leadership skills, which I did not possess at the time. And, that's been my own personal journey. But I imagine, especially when you're leading, there's got to be, let's call it a rigid mindset that thinks, well, it's like I did, I can't let everybody know that I may not know what I'm doing or what a struggle it is to keep the doors open, and I can't deal with your problems in a way that would best serve you, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Let me validate you. In the words of Michael Jackson, you are not alone. And this is a common old school leadership paradigm. I had the same thing too. You may struggle with something I struggled with. Was when I was raised, I thought that leaders were strong and loud and determined and charismatic and bold and right. And I think it's an old paradigm that leadership right now is really around relatability. It's about clarity and brevity. You can have a strong vision and still be open to a better idea. You can admit that you're not an expert on everything and still build credibility and trustworthiness. And I think those actually admissions build credibility amongst people because no one wants to work for the know-it-all CEO or founder. So I think it's a breath of fresh air for the leader to sit down and say, I have to tell you, I really struggle with calculating EBITDA or, reading a P&L isn't my strength, but nobody can close deals better than I can, so I need you all to help manage the cash flow. I need you to help, have an intervention when I'm spending too much money. I think, again, you have to not look like you're an idiot, but I do think there's a level of transparency that most people will cleave to and choose to rise to the occasion to shore up your weaknesses.
Well, I love that. And, again, I wish I could go back in time, but, it is certainly something that I learned in my experiences of weathering 2 Category 5 hurricanes. And the first one alone, because I was, thinking I had the world by the tail, I knew enough and I would be fine, not thinking about what I was venturing off into when I left my friends that night before. And, transparency is something that I don't think people, talk about. We do talk about vulnerability, right? There's Brené Brown's, landmark TED Talk, but, transparency, like I felt like if I shared the struggle of managing cash flow, for example, and we were rapidly growing and expenses were exceeding the pace of our revenues coming in, not that we weren't profitable, you can't buy bread with profits, So it didn't occur to me